Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Greenway Forward podcast, episode 11. Today, I'm joined by Andy Ellis. So, welcome to the show.
Hey, welcome, or thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. We're very glad to have you because, for those unaware, Andy is going to be potentially pursuing a governor candidacy under the Green ticket in Maryland in 2026. So, very excited to hear about your story and hear about your party.
Yeah, yeah. I'm happy to be here today, and I guess the story is, I grew up in a house where politics was really important, and my mom was a Democrat, my dad was a Republican. In the first couple of elections I voted Democrat. I think I voted for Bill Clinton at one point, and probably his second election. But then after that, I started to realize that both parties were bad, and that they were, I lived in states where presidential votes didn't matter, and so I voted for Greens at various points in that. I moved back to Baltimore at some point after traveling the country, coaching college debate for about a decade. And when I moved back to Baltimore, it's an 80% Democratic city, and there's not much politics here. There wasn't a ton of third party stuff that I sensed at the time. But after the 2015 Baltimore uprising, I looked around and I realized that we needed a different political option because the Democrats were offering more of the same. And it was clear that the people in the streets wanted to change the game and wanted to change the way that politics and economics worked in the city. And I found the Baltimore City Green Party, and I joined at that point in 2015. And then I became co chair at some point. And then I also became co chair of the state of Maryland Green Party at some point. I'm on a bunch of national committees. In 2018, I ran for state delegate, and then now I'm planning to run for governor in 2026 as a Green Party candidate, and I'm excited to talk about that and any of the things that led up to that.
Yeah, great story. And one thing I always like to ask is, you had mentioned that you voted for Bill Clinton in both 92 and 96. How did you vote for presidential elections from 2000 to 2020?
I think I voted. I think I voted for Nader in in 2004. I don't think probably didn't vote. I think I was living in Wyoming. I don't know. I may have been registered in Maryland or something. I think 2008 I voted for Obama. Um, and then 2012, I don't know. I don't remember in that race whether I even marked the presidential race.
Did you happen to vote for Stein in 2012 during your first run?
I think I probably did. 20. I did. I kind of was doing non-politically focused work at that time. I wasn't really focused on electoral politics as the outlet. But in 2016, I absolutely voted for Jill Stein, and I was excited about it. In 2016, we held a big rally that we had all of our city council candidates, all of our state candidates. We had Jill and Ajamu there, and it was at the Downtown Cultural Arts Center in Baltimore. And we filled a pretty decent-sized arena for Jill, and I was super excited to get to vote for her there. Obviously, I voted for Howie in 2020, and I was excited to get to do that. And I'll vote for whoever the Green is in 2024.
I would love to go to just a Stein rally like that. I know as soon as she announced her candidacy, I thought, man, if I could go to some sort of Stein rally, and I was looking at all those pictures from 2016 when it was her and Baraka running, and I'm like, those environments just look so fun because it's not just those rallies looked different than the traditional ones that you saw on TV of just them at the podium speaking to a large crowd. It was Stein marching the streets with them,
Yep.
sometimes doing a protest with them. Like now we're seeing a couple of her rallies where she's in support of Palestine and marching the streets with some local university students or local activists or whatever, and talking at the same time. Those are the kinds of rallies that I believe all politicians should do. Be involved with your voters. Whenever you speak from just a podium and you have this big group of people around you, that just kind of signifies you're just talking to a crowd. Whenever you're involved, like how Stein is during her rallies, and you're moving with the people, you're talking with the people directly. You're not 200 feet away, you're an arm's length away from them. That is the kind of messaging that I believe all politicians should do. It'd be something that's great for their base. But seems we're talking to a crowd is just paying off well for the duopoly.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of tricks that the two corporate branded parties use and methods that they use in order to stop them from having to be responsive to people. And they've done everything they can in order to nationalize the campaigns so that they're insulated from what's happening on the ground. And that trickles down from the top to the bottom. You see people in those two corporate branded parties mimicking those processes. And I think it creates not just a disconnection from people, but a lack of responsiveness to people as well. And if our politicians and elected leaders are doing everything they can to not have to be responsive to people, you then start to think about who they are responsive to, and that is party bosses, donors, and lobbyists.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you're involved in that, with the crowd, you're pretty much going your only endorsement is your voter base at that point. Whenever and especially whenever you see them speaking around podium, there's all these sponsors behind them. They're being backed by X oil company or X fossil fuel company. It's just a horrific thing that I've come to realize. And as I told you before the call of how I'm very new to the Green Party and socialism and such, and just getting money out, I'd never realized how much of an impact and how horrific lobbying was and money is in politics. I mean, the whole reason we're in the opioid epidemic, and it's especially hit hard for our region of the northeastern United States, especially in Pennsylvania, is capitalism. That
Yeah.
lobbying and that profit over people driven mindset that's causing these companies to intentionally overprescribe. Going out to doctors' offices and such and promising these gifts for prescribing. It's just the sole cause of it is capitalism, profits over people,
Mm.
and there's no other explanation around it. It's a horrific thing, and the only way we can get rid of that is to make these government entities legitimate. All these government entities aren't necessarily legitimate. They're all funded by corporations or APAC. And the best thing we can do is to get that money out of politics. Then maybe we'll have these government entities actually stepping in what they're supposed to do, regulating these drug companies to as much as they can, and trying to prevent these overdose deaths, and hopefully at some point ending the opioid epidemic.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that the money in politics, along with the nationalization of elections and the branding of the two corporate parties as who are now corporations marketing, voting, and donating, um, are has really separated the ability of people to have democratic control over the institutions that control them. And I think one of the things that we push for and we're pushing for in my campaign is to figure out how to make uh, government institutions responsive to people and to allow people to exert power on them. And in some cases, that means pushing power out to the lowest possible level so that the most power can be exerted. But it also means understanding the reality of the way that money in politics shapes everything, and the way that it is that neither party has any incentive or has any ability to get that money out of politics because it's so fundamental to the way their parties work at this point and that their strategies work.
Yeah, if you just take a look at every party, whatever they're funded by, I mean, Republicans have the huge backing by the NRA, and Democrats are having these funds by the more pro-choice people, because that's the thing about how the two-party system will work together. Republicans will strip away your abortion rights. Democrats will do nothing about it and continue to pretend that they'll protect. The one thing that really set me off recently was seeing a tweet from Biden saying that vote to protect abortion rights. It's like, man, how many opportunities we've given you to do so, and it's just for fundraising. Republicans take away the rights. Democrats don't do anything but pretend to be like we're the people that are going to save you, and then fundraise off of that. The Democrats have made so much of this dirty money from fundraising off of Roe instead of codifying it. Because if they codify it, what are they going to fundraise off of? That's another thing that they can't win elections on. If they actually go through with their promises, then they can't win elections, which might be a good strategy. It's a strategy that I hate, but it's a strategy that works for them, and it's so corrupt, and it's a horrible thing that they're lying to the voters. I mean, they're getting that emotional appeal to the voters, like, oh, the Republicans are are these monsters who want to control women, which they're true, which they're correct about. But the fact that they're taking advantage of that to just fundraise all this money and do nothing about it is just such a sad, sad reality.
Yeah, yeah. And Lee Drutman, who writes a book called The Two-Party Doom Loop, talks about the way that the current process works. And what he says is that each party only exists to make sure that the other one doesn't win. That's their primary goal at this point. And so instead of codifying Roe, Democrats say Republicans would take abortion right away. And the problem with that system is that when the party's purpose is to prevent the other one from winning, not the party's purpose is to govern and be responsive to the people, we end up in cycles like this, where the marketing strategy of Roe, in order to get people to donate for it, in order to get people to vote for it, means keeping it in a precarious position. And we see what happens when they do that. You keep the precarity there long enough, and the other side will take advantage of it. And I think we have to understand that and the media reinforces that. The media reinforces the myth of the two-party system, and they bank off of that. And it used to be that parties 100 years ago, parties were organizing people and parties were engaging in activism. Now these nationalized corporate brand parties just mobilize people. So it used to be, hey, let's show up and do something about this. Now it's, please click the link to send a letter to your senator, right? And that disconnect between organizing and mobilizing works well for parties whose job is to raise money and use it and market votes, but it doesn't work well for people, for working people, and for democracy.
That's just yet another failure of capitalism. Any drive that's the American dream, and what we've been told to us our entire lives is if you work hard enough, if you do whatever you can to make money, you're going to be successful. And so many people have taken that to the extreme that, for example, the example I always point to was John Kapoor. He was the founder of Insys, which is a under the tongue spray fentanyl. Uh, Prescriber. He produced that with Insys, and it caused a handful of deaths, including a judge in Arizona. And that motive to just we need to make a profit. We need to make a profit no matter what is what's killing people. 50,000 people a year in the United States, approximately, die from a lack of healthcare because we refuse to implement universal healthcare because these big pharma corporations are giving all this money to politicians. And who's going to reject that money? If you're in politics, are you going to say no to a $2 million gift? You wouldn't. And that's not what these parties think about. In Pennsylvania, we're right now hearing about a gift ban, which is going through the legislature, which would prevent any cash gifts to legislatures. And the thing that's really screwed up about that is the people who are going to be not benefiting, who are going to be hurting from it, are the ones voting on it. You think any of these politicians are going to be saying, actually, no, I'm going to sign yes on this, and I'm going to vote to make myself get less money from corporations? They're not going to do that. It's the profit-driven capitalist mind that is ruining this country, and is we're screwed for the long run.
Yeah, and if you think about the modern two-party system, right? Like the United States has always moved toward two parties with third parties having a challenge, but the modern version of the two-party system, the way that we know it now in law and in government, was really consolidated by the American Political Science Association in the 1950s. And what they were trying to do was to make a economy that was suitable for capitalism, did not allow arguments about redistribution of power or wealth, and preserve two stable parties that would compromise on things so that there would be a suitable climate for growth, a suitable climate for capitalism, and so that there was not a possibility of radical forces that would call for redistribution. And so the whole system is premised on that concept. The system is premised on the smooth operation of capitalism. I think the other thing that is interesting about this is the system is premised on there being two rational parties that are non-ideological, that are going to end up compromising with each other in the best interest of capitalism and government. But when you start to remove those conditions, you start to realize that the system is not doing what it was supposed to do. When you have polarization, that system becomes a bad system. And when we hear the media talking about how natural the two-party system is or how inevitable it is, they often forget to say what it was designed to do and how it was supposed to work. And if it's not working that way, you see what we have now, which is this sort of doom loop of polarization where each side only wants to obliterate the other and not to be responsive or to help people.
And the funny thing about that is, Democrats are here, Republicans are right here, but the media wants you to believe that they're all the way this far apart. And that's the
Right.
thing too, even in uh public schooling, I can recall to some lessons many years ago when I was in middle school and thinking being told the Democrats are the left, the Republicans are the right. The Democrats are the socialists and communists and the right are the Republicans, they're the capitalists. And it's like and it was very like pro-capitalist heavy. So much like, yeah, capitalism's the greatest. And even in American schools, these kids are being brought up to being, um, to just liking this system and being told you can only vote for this or this. I was not informed. I'd known about third parties for a long time, but I was never taught about third parties whatsoever in any sort of civics class until senior year of high school. It took that long to talk about uh, the break of the duopoly and how the Republicans aren't and Democrats aren't like this. They're like this on a global spectrum. They're pretty far to the right.
Right. And the reality of it is, every time there's been a major move toward justice in the United States, it has been because there has been a third party working for redistribution, challenging the two-party system. If we look back to like 1844, when the Liberty Party ran a candidate, and this is the first time the spoiler argument started to come around. So I think it was 1844, and it was Polk and Clay, the Whig and the Whig and the Democrat. Both of them were pro-slavery, but the Democrat, I think, was Polk. Yeah, the Democrat was Polk, and he also wanted to annex Texas and wanted to, and so the choice was between two people who supported slavery, but one of them was worse because he also wanted to do other bad stuff. And the Liberty Party ran an abolitionist candidate, and that abolitionist candidate said, no, we have to make abolition the core of this question. And black voters and free black voters and independent white voters in New York voted enough for the Liberty Party in order to change the result in New York. Polk got elected. But at the time, that was the first time the spoiler argument came about. And the reality is, if there wasn't a Liberty Party arguing for abolition and forcing the confrontation with it, who knows when we would have gotten to abolition? The Free Soil Party came after that, and the Republican Party came after that, and it forced the question of slavery into a big and important confrontation. But absent the third party advocating for justice, who knows? Who knows where we would have gotten? And that's the same thing in the case of it's the same thing in the case of the New Deal, and the same thing in the case of the Civil Rights era. Almost every time there's been major redistributive and justice-based efforts in the U.S., it's been because a third party has challenged the duopoly.
Yeah, and speaking of what you said before in the whole spoiler argument is, do you really think that these people who voted for the Liberty Party candidate, whose sole thing was abolition, they're not going to go vote for a pro-slavery candidate? That's the thing about it is, if you look at exit polls for 2016, Jill Stein is often blamed on Hillary Clinton's loss, even though Stein voters aren't going to vote for a warmonger capitalist.
Right.
Most of them would have stayed home, or most of them would have probably voted for another third party candidate. But the assumption, the spoiler argument is that every single third party vote would have gone to a Democrat, and that is just a really strange way of looking at things. I feel like they just can't take responsibility for their own. 2016 Democrats couldn't take responsibility of the fact that Hillary Clinton was the best that we can do, so we're just gonna go blame Jill Stein. And then that's of course how the whole RussiaGate started and how Jill Stein is a Russian agent conspiracy started with the single photo of her at a table and Vladimir Putin just so happened to be at that table. That's how we got into this huge spiraling, Russia's involved, and in 2024, I think we're going to see the exact same thing. I believe that Biden is going to get absolutely demolished in the 2024 election. Turns out genocide isn't very popular, but
Yeah,
I
and
think
that's a couple of things about that. I absolutely think you're right that none of the people who ended up voting for Jill Stein were making an election day decision between Hillary Clinton and Jill Stein. There were plenty of Stein voters who, in August or September, thought they were voting for Stein, who did get convinced to vote for Hillary Clinton. So I think the spoiler argument does work, but it doesn't work absolutely. So if Democrats didn't think it worked, they wouldn't make it. And it does work to shave down and to stop the growth of, to shave down the numbers of small parties and to stop the growth of small parties. And I think that's why they do it. They do it because that's their best argument without having to engage in substance. And it has worked to the degree that it has stopped the emergence of a unified left party that could come at them. And it is pretty effective at doing that. What it is not effective at doing is stopping Republican fascists from taking power. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds, in that it stops the emergence of the alternative that could provide an additional check against the fascism of the right, but it doesn't stop the fascism of the right. And so that sort of assumption by Democrats that they are the only answer to the question, and that if you open up the field of political possibilities beyond them, catastrophe will occur, is a really dangerous gamble, and it's one that we're all paying the price for them continuing to make.
and what has voting Democrat gotten these people?
Yeah,
Voting Democrat is not the answer to your problems. You should be, of course, like the thing that a lot of liberals like to say about socialists like us and Green Party members is that, we only care about destroying the Democratic Party and we're on the side of the Republicans. No, I hate everything the Republicans stand for, just like you claim to be. So why are you voting for the party that is aiding in their assistance of doing whatever? I mean, I want to have, federal row codification. I want these federal protections for trans kids. I want these federal protection to codify gay marriage. I want all these progressive federal codifications. And voting Democrat doesn't get a single one done because all they do is assist the Republican Party in destroying all those things nationwide, which makes me extremely sad. So why don't we vote for the actual option that actually stands for these people that are being targeted? That's the best
yeah.
thing that we can do, but we're being told never vote third party because it's only going to hurt the Republicans, or it's only going to hurt the Democrats and help the Republicans. And another thing I always see Democrats say is that, oh, the Green Party only comes up every 4 years to run as president and destroy the Democrats' chances. We are a grassroots, locally run party. Most of the stuff done is out in your backyard.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. So I think that as long as the goal of the Green Party is to be a third party in a two-party system, then the degree to which we have political power is to threaten to spoil, right? Like that's really all there is. If we accept that it's a two-party system, the extent of third-party power in that system is to threaten to take votes from one side and give them to the other. And I think we need to start or take results from one side and give them to the other. Now, there's question. We can say Jill Stein didn't do that in 2016. We can say that Ralph Nader didn't do that in 2000. But the fundamental power that we have is to threaten to do that, right? Because otherwise, if we're not in the governing coalition and we're not elected, those votes have a different role than a vote for a Democrat or a Republican does. And I think we have to get to a point where we A, recognize that that's our power as a third party in a two-party system, and B, recognize that the kind of system we want is a multi-party system where there are multiple parties represented in the governing coalition, and that at each district multiple parties are represented. Like, I think the Democratic Party makes sense as a sort of center right, center left party in a multi party system. What I don't think it makes sense as is a party that tries to apply those philosophies and cover everything to the left of Joe Manchin. And so they want to go from everything from Joe Manchin to Jill Stein, and that's an untenable political coalition. It doesn't make any sense, and when they try to keep it together, we see what happens. They can't get anything done, and they can neither get the liberal agenda that they're looking for done, nor the radical agenda they promise at election time. And so I think like we have to start thinking about a future with a multi-party system in which Democrats forward, no labels, Republicans, Libertarians, Greens, Black workers' parties, working class parties all have different places to play in the governing coalition, and then we'll start to see, and like, look, multi-party systems are not a utopia, but they're better at allowing people to work for democracy and justice than a two-party system controlled by the corporations.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm gonna be voting green my entire life,
Yeah,
unless there's another like if someone's running locally as like a PSL candidate or an independent socialist, of course I'll vote for that. I will never ever ever vote Democrat or Republican in my entire life. I'll
yeah,
be voting in my first election this year, and my first vote cast will be in July. I actually have to vote in the PA primaries for the Greens, which I believe is in 2 weeks. I believe it's on February 24th. I will be voting in the
yeah.
PA Green primaries, which will be my very first vote cast. And I am just so excited that this is like my year to finally get involved. And I'm so glad that last year I left the Democratic Party because if not, I would be we wouldn't be on here. I would still be having my Fetterman sign and my Biden sign in my room. And just be like fully like Biden 2024. So very excited to vote for Jill Stein in the primaries for president in 2024. I think she's the best in the Green
Yeah,
Party for sure.
I'm very excited that you made that choice and that you have joined the resistance. Now we just have to fight until we can rebuild democracy in a way that works for all of us.
And the first way to stop that is to get money out of politics. That's why I'm watching this gift ban so closely in the PA
Yeah,
legislature. I highly doubt it's going to pass because, like I said, if you were to have a vote of say the Senate. You vote for the Senate. All right, we're gonna vote to low. You're gonna have a vote where your salaries are gonna be cut by $10,000 each. Is a single person going to do that? Not a single person is going to do that. So why would these people vote to ban cash gifts? Now there's probably gonna be loopholes around it. Like if you ban cash gifts, oh, well, maybe we'll give you a winning lottery ticket. I have no idea, but something that it's a start. But if
absolutely.
but it should be up to the citizens to vote for that. If it was up to the citizens and we had a special election on May 12th or whenever it is in PA, if we had an election that day to say gift ban pass or no, or like you vote yes or no, I believe overwhelmingly people are going to vote yes for that because they too, even if they're Democrats or Republicans, they too want to see money out of politics, and that would really only benefit people at the statewide PA level. But that's a really really good start.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that, I think that the question is there's so much to do and so much to be done, and where do we start? And I think focusing on a piece of tangible legislation allows you to not only explain the specific policy, but also to explain the larger politics behind it. And I think the gift ban is a good example of that. The analysis can show, and I'm sure the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have different positions on them, even if they're similar. But I think the goal of the analysis should be to show that even if both parties are different, they both have insufficient answers to address this question. And I think that's where third parties thrive. It's not when they say that the two parties are the same. I think that's too easy for the two parties to answer. But when they say that they're different, but both fail, right? And so I think you can say, while there are similarities between the two parties on Roe, at the end of the day, while there's similarities, there's also differences. But at the end of the day, there's no codified Roe, and we need Roe codified. And I think with Israel in Palestine is another example, right? Like, um, the Republican Party wants to celebrate Netanyahu. The Democratic Party wants to condemn him. But at the same time, both of them have what did I just do?
You're good. I can still hear you.
Okay. Both of them have policies that fail. Both of them have policies that support Israel, and both of them have policies that undermine the self-determination and democracy in Palestine. And I think it's one of the things I've learned over time is that it is more effective to communicate that, not that they're the same, but that they're different, but both wrong. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't point out the places where there's similarity, but that we shouldn't dwell on that similarity. We should focus on how they're both failing.
Absolutely. And and as you said, third parties will thrive at the local level if people just get involved at the local level. Someone part of Allegheny Greens recently won council for a town called Edgewood, which is
Mhm.
just outside of the city. It's maybe 5 minutes, if that, outside the city of Pittsburgh. And she came in third place. It was a vote three kind of thing, and she came in third place. But she still won, and there is a green
Yep.
right now sitting on the Edgewood City Council. That's phenomenal. I believe in I do plan to run for school board at some point under the green ticket. It just even if you don't win, getting your name out there, seeing GRN or G on the ballot is going to provoke people. We have a local newspaper that gets sent on the first of each month to every resident in this town. I live in a town of about 13,000 people. Every single resident in the town, every household gets this paper. And anytime there's some sort of election season, they interview every single candidate, including independents. So that gives me hope that if someone wants to run under a third party ticket, you can run and you will get this interview, you will get this public space, and you can just kind of, vent your frustrations about how the two-party system has failed us. Even if it's something as simple as school board, the two-party system is absolutely failing us. Even on things as simple as that, the Republicans have just been going I can't even describe the amount the Republicans are going, school board wise. We need to get every Republican out of school board. But the answer to that is not replacing them with Democrats because that's not what it doesn't get anything done. I would love to see every Republican get out of the school board in the country because they are doing detrimental damage to this country's
Yep.
youth by book banning, saying everything is woke indoctrination. That's really really harming our youth, especially things such as they will ban anything that they don't like. And the one thing that I really feel for is you have these young 8, 9, 10-year-old LGBTQ kids who feel like they are so isolated because now they can't go into their school library and read a book on like am I normal? They might have been ostracized their whole life by their family and by their peers. And by having that material to realize like it's okay if you're trans, if you're bi, if you're gay, it's okay to have these feelings at this age because you are completely normal, just like the rest of us. And to see these Republicans ostracize them and make it so they don't have this material is just going to cause so much further detriment to the community. And it just is a horrific thing. And whenever I started seeing that stuff, I'm like, man, I should really run for school board, and not that that's happening
It,
in this area. It's not,
yeah.
but
And when you think about it, like the Republican approach is this, so like let's take the fight over CRT as an example, right? The Republicans were like, they are teaching CRT in our schools, and CRT says that our system is fundamentally racist, right? And the Democrats are saying, no, they're not teaching CRT in our schools, when the real answer is our system is fundamentally racist and our students need to be taught that. And the unwillingness to defend the radical position, the sort of Democrat and liberal tendency to dismiss that is happening instead of having to engage the argument that Republicans are making, is exactly the type of model that I'm talking about, where the two-party system is not creating the answers that we need, and instead is allowing them to fight each other, but not really address the truth of the matter of the question, right? And so, in the same thing in the LGBTQ example, Republicans would say they are teaching people how to be gay or something
just
ridiculous
just
like that.
the woke indoctrination and
Yeah,
teach and oh my God, the one thing that I saw recently is um woke kindergarten has been a thing spreading around the right, and I think it was an example. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was some such minute example that every 5-year-old. I think it was about just like, we're all the same, treat people correctly. It's something that I learned when I was a kindergarten. I learned, no matter the color of your skin, no matter how you look, we should all be friends with each other and we should be
right.
taught respect. But now they've weaponized any sort of equality things and called it woke, and that's their favorite thing to say.
In the mainstreaming of a series of social justice arguments and in a series of radical arguments, distilled down to the sort of social media version of them, has made it hard to engage in radical politics because the right has a good target. The right can set that target up, and because people don't know about what these radical politics actually are, the social media version they see of it sounds like the thing the right is talking about, when in reality there's a deeper analysis, there's a deeper rooting in history, and it has made the moment difficult that a lot of these ideas that used to be only part of the left or only part of radical communities have been mainstreamed, because Democrats kind of take ownership of them and then don't defend them. And so, like, if you think about the concept of identity politics, when identity politics started, it was about class and race and gender and religion and all of the combination of things that make up somebody's identity and how that causes them to interact with the world. What it has been stripped down to by the Clintons and the Democratic Party is representation politics. So we've taken the class aspects out of it, and we have simply said, and they have said, now identity politics describes whether you see people that look like you in office. And while it's important to see people that look like you in office for everybody, that's not the same as um, an analysis that couples class and race and religion to determine an entire identity. And I think what is difficult for radicals and for radical politics is trying to decide whether we reclaim those terms from the mass marketing that the Democrats have engaged in, or whether we shift and use new terms to better to describe our current confrontation with the status quo.
Absolutely, and I think you're completely right about that. And again, you have the party that is against all of it. You have the party that is pretends to be for it, but in the end helps the party that's against all of it. And then you have the third, smaller party that stands completely for it. So I really don't see a reason why so many Democrats just straight up refuse to vote for Greens. I mean, you claim to stand for all these things, and the Green Party is going to give it to you. All you're going to do is vote for them. But I think the mongering of the Democratic Party and the whole Trump scare, which for a while I was just like, we got to do everything we can to prevent Trump, and I still stand with that. Trump's a horrific human being who should never be president and enter the White House ever again, and I hate him with everything I have. But they're using that again to attract voters to their voter base. And Democrats and Republicans work with each other all the time, not just for these
Yeah.
social issues, but to preserve corporate capitalism. If they can get people to vote for them because saying, but Trump, and that's their only argument in the 2024 election is but Trump. They don't have any other good reason to back Joe Biden. His horrific approval rating, the fact that he's funding a genocide, he's been uh, approving more fossil fueling drilling than Trump, and he's just been absolute train wreck of a president, but people are still going to vote for him because he's not Trump. I don't think there's a single thing that you can get a lot of these people to vote not for Biden for. If genocide doesn't cross the line, then what is the line? There is
I
no
mean, I
line.
think right. If genocide is an acceptable lesser evil, then there's no line. But I think genocide is actually, I mean, I would actually say this is an example of third party politics working right now, because Jill Stein and Cornel West and Claudia are all raising the question of genocide. And it's scaring him because he's seeing the poll numbers of people who say they won't vote for him as a result of it. And so he's trying to do things like starting to condemn Netanyahu, starting to talk about two-state solutions, starting to talk about sanctions on settlers. And so, I mean, I think that this is an example of it working to shift the conversation. So with Jill and Cornell out there, they're pushing him, they're pulling him in a place that also makes it untenable for his right wing. So and so I mean, like I say, I think we have to, in order to get people to want to be part of the Green Party who aren't already part of the Green Party, we have to be able to explain the forces at play and how we interact on those. So I think there's often a tendency where we sort of assume that we have no effect on actual policy, and that we're just giving people an additional choice. And I think that model of voter choice is good to an extent, but what we really need to think about is how we use Green Party politics to change outcomes that are in line with our values. And I think Jill Stein, speaking at the rally in DC and speaking in other places about genocide, is forcing Joe Biden to make policy choices that he wouldn't have otherwise made. Now, is it going to be enough? No. Is it going to allow for peace and self-determination and democracy in Israel and Palestine? No. But it is an example of us being relevant political forces that are moving the outcomes that are happening. And we need to keep doing it. We need to keep doing it. And people who refuse to vote for him, Democrats who refuse to vote for him because of this, need to keep demanding that he do different things. And Jill Stein needs to keep saying she'll meet those demands. And that's how we shift the conversation, and that's how we shift politics. So, I mean, I just wanted to go back to that. It's the reason many Democrats, many progressive Democrats, don't join the Green Party is because they don't understand the theory of action, and they don't understand how Greens think that they're playing in the larger political game. And I think sometimes that's because we don't understand it, and so I think we would do well to understand how the politics we engage in change outcomes as opposed to just give voters extra choices.
Yeah, and that's a great way of putting it. A lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people think the Greens are just here every 4 years to spoil the Democrats and things like that. But you're completely right. I mean, that pressure from not only just one third party candidate, and I consider Jill to be a major third party candidate. She's ran multiple times. She's got that name recognition out there, whether it be positive or negative. And her, Cornell, and Claudia, them three, even though Claudia is a lot smaller than Cornell and Joe, and even Cornell has gotten a lot smaller after his, and I hate to say it because I love the man, but he's had an absolute train wreck of a campaign, all these party switches and resigning of campaign managers. It's just not worked out for him, and I really hated to see that for him because I originally backed him. And if Jill didn't run, I would certainly vote for Cornell West, but I really just hate to see how that campaign fell apart because he would have had that green vote, that green nomination, and we could have had a much stronger um, force driving. But it's okay because at least we have Jill Stein and putting that pressure on Biden to realize,
Yep.
like, you know, man, like my approval rating's in the toilet. I have to find a way to just improve somewhere. We're not necessarily pulling Biden left, but we're just putting the pressure on him. That's also putting pressure among the voters that are closest to him. So the voters that are, if Biden's here and you have a voter that's here and here, they're not really going to be affected. But we're really hoping for is to get the voters that are all around him like this. The ones that are like, he's been a failure, someone who is like on the fence of rejecting capitalism, and then someone over here who is, um, who might completely stand with Israel, but then seeing Biden starting to withdraw support for Netanyahu, that's another thing that's going to put pressure on the voter a little bit to the right of Biden versus the one to the left of Biden. And this is another example of third parties playing a significant role, and it's something that I've been very excited to see play out. And putting that pressure on Biden, I would love to see Jill debate Biden. It's never going to happen, but
Yep.
if it was televised, if people in America, as much as they love to watch debates, if that was on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all these major networks, Jill Stein versus Joe Biden debate, we all know Stein would absolutely cook Biden to death during the debate. And if we could just get that up there, that will surely get the number over 5%. I have faith that we will get about 5, 6% it come this election cycle for Jill. And seeing that on live TV for millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people to see, including your boomer grandma or your 12-year-old nephew, all of them are going to see it and be like, God, this guy's a disaster. This woman is actually really smart and knows how to function. I mean, the two people that are most people are going to vote for can't function. They both have severe cognitive decline. They obviously aren't fit to serve president. And if we could get that on the debate stage with Jill, she would destroy the both of them in a few minutes. And getting
Yeah.
that voice out there and that name out there would really encourage people to vote for Jill. And we can do it, but the duopoly is never going to allow for these third parties to have a significant voice like that because they know if they do, they're toast.
Yep. 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 And so I think there's a really Bernard Tomas, who wrote a book called "The Rise and Demise of Third Parties in America," is a really good. He did a really good scholarly analysis of this, and he says that the things that hold third parties back are a lack of resources. So resources, we talked about money in politics earlier. The amount of money it takes to run a campaign at this point is just not available to grassroots parties that don't take that kind of money. So that provides a significant barrier. The next thing is the lack of media attention for third parties. Because they don't have the resources. And then the third thing is because they don't have the media attention or the resources in our two-party system, they don't win that many seats. So you get this loop where they don't have resources because they don't win seats, and they don't get media coverage because they don't win seats. And and so you continue to have them sort of spin their wheels in this system. And I think there's a couple ways to think about policy things that we can do to get out of that. One of them is starting to shift public funding of candidates in elections to small parties. So if you think about it like this, we have these fair election funds where we have publicly funded elections and things like that, and we have a few of them in Maryland. We have them here in Baltimore City. We have them for the governor's office in Maryland, and a few other counties have them. But the problem is they're funding the candidates in the big two parties to run primary races. And yeah, sure, a Green Party candidate can qualify them, but there's still an investment in a candidate. And a candidate centered electoral system is going to gravitate toward the middle. It's going to focus on the two parties. It's going to focus on wealthy people. It's going to focus on people who already have access to power. If we had a party-based electoral system in which we invested in parties as the foundational basis of American democracy and the foundational basis of conveying people's ideas into policy, then we would invest. When the Maryland Green Party gets on the ballot each year, they'd get $10,000. When the Pennsylvania Green Party gets on the ballot, they'd get $10,000 or something like that, so that they can reach out to their voters, so that they can build connections, so that they can actually have power. So that's one thing that I think would challenge it. And the other thing is starting to shift to a multi-party system at state and local levels where we have multi-member districts and proportional representation so that we're not trying to compete in majority take all elections because like we might win some majorities here and there, but majoritarianism is inherently not great for socialist or radical candidates. Whereas proportionality, which says, hey, 20% of people believe this, and that means that we should have some level of power, is good for socialist candidates. It is good for them to be able to, it's a different kind of thinking. It's a more socialist, more egalitarian type of thinking that says if we have 20% of the voters, we should get 20% of the power, as opposed to a system that says if you have 51% of the voters, you get all of the power. And it's the current approach, the 51% gets you all of the power, is a zero-sum binary game, and that's why they make the spoiler argument. The other approach is a positive-sum approach, where we can have multiple parties representing multiple different perspectives, and we can have a government designed to allow that to happen. And I say those things because I think they help to talk about the bridge between now and the future that we want. Because in the future we want Greens to be in power. We want Greens to be able to govern. And to do that, I think we have to invest in parties, and I think we have to have a system that supports parties and not just individuals.
And we're not going to get anywhere near that if we allow corporations to rule this country.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm also curious, and we were going to, of course, mention this. So you're pursuing a candidacy for 2026 as governor of Maryland.
Yeah.
What are your main issues that you're focused on in this sort of campaign?
Yeah, so I sort of joke and say climate democracy in baseball right now, and I use baseball. Let me actually start there. So one of the things that I've been arguing all year is the Baltimore Orioles have been trying to sign a new lease with the state of Maryland, and they ended up doing it. State of Maryland ended up giving $600 million of taxpayer subsidies to the Baltimore Orioles in order to have them stay here in Baltimore. The billionaire team owner will get to use that in order to enhance the stadium and do development stuff like that. Our argument all year has been that this is a silly game that is indicative of the problem of the political system, where Democrat and Republican politicians fall all over themselves to give private businesses billions of dollars of subsidies. And what we should instead do is make the Orioles a public entity, by have the state run the Orioles as a public utility with democratic control, with fans being able to own the team, with the state being part of that process. So I joke when I say baseball, but it's really a larger conversation to talk about public ownership and community ownership, as opposed to public-private partnerships and helping out developers. Another big issue for us is democracy. And so we want to lay out a plan for Maryland to be a multi-party democracy. Democracy is pretty much broken in Maryland. Right now, Democrats are so dominant here that our electoral votes haven't gone to a Republican since Reagan and George H.W. Bush were on the ballot. Our entire executive, all of the executive offices are run by Democrats. Our state legislature has decades long veto proof majorities for Democrats. And seven of our top population counties have Democrat executives, and several of them have only Democrats elected. So we need to focus on changing the democratic situation in Maryland, make it a multi-party state, and actually make it so that I mean, let me put it this way. I think like three of the almost 100, or three of the state Senate races were closer than 10 points in the last time. Many of, like 20 of them were unopposed, right? And so we don't have this system where government is forced to be responsive to people because there's no contest and one party dominates most of the time. The third thing I would say is climate. And I think, you know, climate is the toughest one in some sense because our governor is actually pretty okay at climate compared to the Republican we had before him. But he's still using a very market based approach, and he's still investing in this sort of layer of environmental advocacy organizations in order to separate him from having to engage with the people and communities who are most affected by climate. So we're going to put forth a climate plan that puts power into communities and puts power into people's hands instead of the nonprofit industrial sector, and that uses the emergency powers of the state. During COVID, we saw what the emergency powers of Maryland can do, what the emergency powers of Pennsylvania can do. The ability to set up those clinics around the state really quickly, the ability to make unemployment funding available is a good hint of what we can do if we want to start fighting climate. And so we will be able to set up so we're still working on the climate plan, but the general idea is make resources available immediately to people who are facing the most direct effects from climate, engage in climate justice and climate reparations in order to heal communities that have been hurt and people that have been hurt, use tax credits and basic income to assure a just transition so that people who are in fields right now that need to be eliminated for us to be a healthy planet don't have to make a choice between economy and ecology, and then do what we can. I mean, there's not a lot that states can do, but there's some stuff that states can do, and most of it is ameliorative. Most of it is preparing for climate change, and preparing for adaptation. But you know, there's a lot we can do. So we'll be working on a plan for that pretty soon. We just released our plan for a solidarity economy this week, and we can talk about that in a second. But those three issues: climate, democracy, and corporate control, are really the core of what we're talking about.
Cool. And I knew you mentioned that about comparing Westmore and Larry Hogan on certain issues, and you're right. I was a bit impressed on Westmore's positions on climate stuff, but as you said, it's still capitalist driven, it's still market driven. That's the problem, is even the best that we can get amongst a duopoly is still going to be capitalist and market driven, and that's the main thing that's slowing us down. I mean, you have all these I mean, Hawaii, if we get the continue rate, is going to be underwater at a certain. At least some of the cities are going to be underwater by 2050. We're going to be losing. Like, here's the thing that people aren't realizing: we're going to be losing literal countries by 2050. Maldives, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, Palau, Kiribati, Tonga, Samoa, all those countries that no one thinks about. There are people living on those countries. There are tens of thousands of people that live in these nations, even though they're really tiny. All these people live in these nations. There are governments here. These people matter. And the fact that we're just willing to sweep it all under the rug, and by 2050, at the current rate we're going, we currently have 197 countries, and we might be down to 190 by
Hmm.
2050 comes. And it doesn't shock people when you like if you were to go and tell them the climate crisis is going to be bad by 2050, they might not listen to you. But what I've learned recently is something that I came up with to say is if we don't take action, 7 countries are going to go away by 2050, and they're going to be submerged underwater. That gets people to think like, wait, we're not just going to be, it's not just going to be the planet's going to be getting a little hotter. Full-blown countries with UN power are going to be underwater and no longer exist. These countries are going to cease to exist. There will be none. There will be none of these countries. They'll be wiped from the map. But people just fail to realize that, and it's a sad, sad thing about this market-based driven capitalism when it comes to climate.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, we're experiencing that in Maryland, where Eastern Shore counties, small towns on the Bay and the Eastern Shore are routinely underwater these days. And what used to be once or twice a season flooding is now a part of the tide cycle. And so, the reality of those type of things, like we need to make sure that the people who live in those places have the resources they need in order to adapt to this. While we're also beginning to go after the corporations that have done this. And, one thing I like to say is we're going to sue the corporations that have contributed and willingly contributed to the climate crisis here, and we're going to use the rewards that we get or the awards that we get out of that in order to pay reparations to people who have lost their homes, their livelihoods, and everything else from the climate crisis. But we're also going to have to pay a lot of money in order to make resilient structures so that not everybody is having to rebuild their home all the time. If you look at the way that the Gulf Coast states run by Republicans, people are insurance companies are stopping insuring homes there. And if you think about a world in which your home is no longer insured, the foundation of working class wealth and the foundation of working class stability in this country goes away. If your home that you've invested most of your income in, if you're a homeowner or even a renter, gets killed or gets destroyed by a storm and insurance won't pay to replace it, like we're talking about whole levels of economic displacement that I think people haven't really begun to process yet. So we need to states are going to increasingly bear the burden for paying for people who are facing the results of these climate things. And we need to include that in our taxation strategy and our budget strategy, because otherwise that's where all the money is going to go in 2050. All the money that we would like to spend on community colleges and in transit and other things that are useful and good things for the state to invest in are going to be diverted to paying disaster relief, because insurance isn't going to do it and the federal government is increasingly not doing it.
And
So we got to think about those types of things at a state level when we're talking about this, um, because states don't get to do what the federal government gets to do in deficit spend. States have to balance budgets.
yeah, and even then, we're not seeing a lot of relief. The big example I like to point to is the Maui wildfires. All these people have been displaced, lost homes, and Biden gave them a check for a whopping $700.
Right.
What is that going to do for these people? It's in expanding not just FEMA, but expanding at the state level specifically, distribute different ways. There might not be as many natural disasters in Pennsylvania that are going to affect people in Hawaii or California or Florida or the Great Plains. That just the fact that we're not willing to provide for our citizens in such a basic regards, the fact that we can't even go to a medical facility without paying out of pocket is
Yep.
absurd. The fact that we have to pay to get an education is absurd. We have all this money that's being funneled a lot to the military, a lot to these cop cities that we could be using for the betterment of our citizens. But what's that
Yep.
going to do to
And,
preserve corporate capitalism? Nothing. They're capitalist parties. That's all they're going to care about.
yep. 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 And I would say, like, look, the collapse when collapse occurs, we talk about when climate collapse comes, and I think collapse comes to different communities at different times. And the moment that collapse is marked by is when a disaster happens and the society and the government and the civic or in the social sector is not there to help you get back to where you were, and instead you just have to deal in this world after that without resources, without support. So collapse is when the fire comes and there's no FEMA check and there's no insurance and you're left with no resources in your community, and you have to rebuild from the ground up. That's what collapse looks like. And climate collapse and capitalism collapse are happening to communities all around Maryland and all around Pennsylvania, where something happens and the society that you have paid taxes into and the society that you rely on to help when that happens isn't there, and you have to rebuild things from the grassroots. I mean, I think the hope out of that is out of those folks who have had to build institutions for survival after collapse come the future institutions that exist after capitalism, right? Like those are the things that we have to look to understand how we survive the downfall of capitalism and the end of or in the climate collapse. But like it's hard, and it comes out of necessity, and it could be we live in a precarious state where at any point um, any of our communities could face a disaster like that, increasingly likely because of climate change. And the question is, will the government be there to help us get back on our feet using the only resources the government can, or are we stuck in survival mode trying to fight in a world where society has failed?
Yeah, and I think the first step to doing that is just educating people on the climate. We're so propagandized in this nation with the whole climate debate, and having people realize that instead of being, your two options again, your two major options are climate change isn't real, and climate change is real, but we're not going to do a thing about it. There needs to be that third option that we are willing to give. Like we are willing to give these so-called progressive Democrats exactly what they want, but the blind loyalty is preventing them from voting for a green candidate.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I love about the opportunity to run this race in Maryland is Wes Moore and the Democratic leadership have no opportunity to say, well, they would do this, they would do better if they could. There's not significant Republican opposition, so they get to do what they want to do, right? And so they can put their best cards on the table, and we can offer a green alternative to that. And we can say, like when a Democrat government has all the power and all the resources, this is what they put on offer. This is what we have on offer that counters both what they have and what the Republicans have. And we think it's better for working class people and communities. And we think value based policy that's rooted in democracy, justice, peace, and ecology is the way to make it so we have an economy and a state where we can all thrive.
That's absolutely correct. Love that you're running this campaign because it's. I don't follow Maryland politics very well, but I'm very curious if you would on if you don't, that's fine. But the statistics of the best that a Green has ever done in a governor race.
In a governor race, we've never gotten above 1%. And 1% is our ballot access threshold. And so, aside from the outward politics of it, one of the things that I'm trying to do with this race is to set a template so that we always get above 1% from now on, so that we don't have to petition anymore. So, for Greens in Maryland, you have to get 1% in the presidential race or at the gubernatorial race in order to maintain ballot access. Absent that, we have to petition every 4 years in order to get 10,000 valid signatures. So, one of the goals here is to make a step change in the way that Greens run races in Maryland so that we always get 1% in those races to set down the concept and templates that allow future candidates to know they can get that 1%. Because once we free ourselves from having to do that ballot access petitioning every 4 years, we free up people, we free up resources, and we free up time and money. So, I think the best we've ever done is like a 0.9% or something like that. And my goal is to take the party from a party that tries to get 1% in the governor's race, but then has to petition, to a party that always gets 1% in the governor's race, so that we don't always have to petition. And if we're petitioning, it's in order to support grassroots efforts that our allies and supporters are engaging in, not for our own existence.
Yeah, and I just put up the statistics right now. It won't show it exactly the results from any Green candidates, but it does show that in the 2016 election, Jill Stein was polling at 1.29.
Yeah.
Oh no, this isn't polling. This is the results. Yeah, so you had mentioned that you could get ballot access if you got 1% of the presidential, and Jill Stein received 1.29% of the votes in Maryland in 2016. So does that mean that you no longer have to petition at all?
And so this is a weedsy part of the ballot access process. So a petition, submitting signatures on a petition gets you 2 election cycles. Getting 1% in a gubernatorial presidential race gets you 1 cycle.
Oh.
So we had to petition for 2016 to get to have Joe on the ballot and a bunch of other folks that year. Um, and so, regardless of whether Jill got 1% in 2016 or 2018, or in 2016, we were going to be on the ballot for 2018. Now, if we had gotten 1% in the 2018 governor's race, then then Howie would have been able to be on the ballot without having to petition again.
I think that really sucks in how the third parties are treating it. Since like that, you need to have these petitions that, it should really be, in my opinion, it should just be, if you're eligible to run, you should be on the ballot. But if it has to be that technical, once you're on the ballot once, there's no reason why you should have to regain ballot access whatsoever. Just a way for them to destroy the third party system once again. And
Yeah.
it's really sad.
This week, a piece of legislation that I've worked on for a really long time called the Ballot Petition Modernization Act, and I can send you information about that, got dropped in the state Senate and the state House. So, what it does is it allows there to be electronic signatures on petitions. So, like, you can go to a website and put in your name and information, and then say, "This is my electronic signature." And in 2020, during COVID, the Greens and the Libertarians were able to get the State Board of Elections to allow temporary electronic signatures. So they allowed us to build a piece of software that did that. And then we had to sue them in federal court in order to get the threshold of signatures lowered and to affirm the electronic petitions. That was great. So in 2020, they did it and it worked. And the new director of the State Board of Elections, when he got appointed this year, said that that was a win for voting rights. It worked for voters and it worked for counties. However, after 2021, they took that away. They took away the electronic signatures. So what we've been working on over the last couple of years is going through the General Assembly with the bill that allows there to be electronic signatures on petitions. And our argument is that even if they're going to require these petitions, the idea that in 2024 a person has to handwrite the information that is in the database, and then we collect it, and then we give it to another person whose job is to read the handwriting and type it into the database to see if it's valid, is a ridiculous concept when we know that the state can handle electronic petitions. So what this would do is, this bill in the short term would allow third parties to create software that allowed for electronic petition signatures. But in the long term, it would shift this responsibility of developing the software from the parties to the state. Because right now, I can go to the State Board of Elections website, I can change my voter registration, I can change my party affiliation, I can request an absentee ballot, I can file for a political action committee, I can sign all my campaign finance reports, and even most tellingly, I can open up a PAC so that I can take unlimited amounts of money and funnel it to whatever I want with an electronic signature, but I can't put something on the ballot with an electronic signature right now. So we are pushing on this piece of legislation. We think it is a model for the rest of the country, and we think it is a way to take this 19th century process of petitions and modernize it so that, like, you and I don't have to be at the farmer's market at exactly the same time on a Saturday morning for you to express your voting rights.
I really like the way you put that, and let's hope that that gets passed. 'Cause that's more wins for third parties, even though it might not, necessarily be more wins, but just more benefits and a way to challenge that duopoly system. It's the best thing we can do.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I, the state delegate who is sponsoring it is optimistic about it this year, and I trust her reading of the room. But the legislature is not our last option. We will appeal if the legislator doesn't pass it. It's a good thing that the new director of the State Board of Elections likes this. He likes this technology. He's the one who helped us when he had another job at the State Board of Elections in 2020. He's the one who helped us get it approved. He thinks it's good for voting rights. So it's good to have those kind of allies on questions like this. Now we just have to figure out the political forces at play in order to be able to allow him to help us. Because I don't know what your board of elections is like, but the administrator of ours doesn't get to make these decisions. A board appointed by the two party gets to make them, and he administrates those. So we need to work with him and the legislature to figure out how to make this a reality. Some of these things are an interesting place for third parties because the people from the two parties aren't super excited to have us saying it, but it is really helpful to have the director of the Board of Elections on the record saying that this is a voting rights issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's just hope that that gets done and see where it goes from there.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Um,
I think that'll do it for our time here on the podcast. Was there anything you wanted to end off with? Any last messages?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So this week, two things I want to say. This week, I'm in the process of putting out our response to Governor Westmore's State of the State address. So this week, Governor Moore gave his second State of the State address. He focused on safety. He focused on affordability. He's focused on service, and he focused on competitiveness of the economy. So we're going to be offering a green perspective that challenges both the Democrats and the Republicans on this. And you can see that on my website, gogreen2026.com. And on there, there's an issues button, and under issues, you can see State of the State. So there you'll be able to see our sort of week-long response to that. And the second thing I would say is we've been doing a podcast recently that is on YouTube, and so youtube.com at gogreen2026. And what we're doing in that is it's really a political education tool to bring in advocates, academics, and activists who are working on issues that we think are relevant to the campaign and relevant to Maryland. And so this past week, I talked to a friend of mine about resisting these new tough on crime bills that the Democrats have put out this week. In the past, we've talked about community responses to drug overdoses and addiction. Next week, we're going to talk about tax policy and reparations. So these are really deep dives on policy and political questions, and I encourage folks to check those out. Both of those things, should be available on the website. And really, what we're trying to do is to offer a critique of the two parties and show why they're failing to work for justice, peace, democracy, and ecology, and then put together a green political program as an alternative to it so that people can see in policy terms what it looks like to have Greens in the governing coalition. And I would love to have folks check that out. And I really enjoyed this time this morning. I didn't realize it had already been on for an hour and 15 minutes because the conversation's been flowing, but I'd love to come back and talk to you more about it and keep the conversation going.
Absolutely, yeah. Be sure I can leave some links in the description of this video. Check out the podcast. I listened to one as soon as I woke up this morning. Thought it was really good. Um, so just gonna go from there, and yeah, so that'll conclude it for episode 11 of the Green Bay 4 podcast. We'll be back next weekend. I actually don't have a guest next weekend. They lined up exactly, but we'll find somebody for next weekend. We got through 11 episodes, and on to episode 12 next weekend. So thanks for joining me, Andy, and we'll see you back here for next weekend's podcast.
Great. Thank you.